if I could give any advice to anyone who's like, I'm learning and, you know, I want to know more about identity politics, I would say, like, sit with those hard conversations that make you uncomfortable. I have them all the time. There's stuff that I still have to check myself with, you know, like where I'm learning things too. Like, none of us are um free from fucking white supremacy in the existence of the world. Like, I'm sorry, but that's just a reality. It's a constant thing you have to work on. You can't sit there and say, in this house or in this business, we do, you know, like, okay, but are you actually doing that when your staff is Black, brown, and indigenous and says something? Are you deflecting and saying you're the problem for being too aggressive? Or are you sitting with that discomfort and being like, hey, you know, maybe I did cause some harm there?
I'm so glad you could make it. Sit down, sit down. Oh, yeah. Oh, the band is gonna be awesome tonight. I dig it. I'm so glad you could make it.
Season 4 of Therapy Sessions with Auntie Hair Coach. I'm your host, Auntie Hair Coach, and I interview everyday people telling real stories about their beauty industry journey. Today's guest is two-spirited artist and educator around politics and identity in the beauty industry. And by the time you hear this podcast, they will have taken the leap of faith to become their own beauty industry boss. Tash has entered the chat. Welcome and congratulations on your next chapter.
Thank you so much, Tasha. It's an honor being on here with you today, and I'm really excited to talk to you.
So, before we really jump into all the things, my listeners always just like to have an idea of who we're talking to.
Absolutely.
So just kind of give us an idea of who you are and what shaped you into the person that we see today.
Yeah. Well, my name is Tash. I am a two-spirit artist and educator. My pronouns are they, them. I've been in the beauty industry now for 20 years. 10 of those years have been here in Oregon, and 10 of those years have been in my hometown of San Diego. I went to a beauty school that was kind of far from my house. I just wanted to be in the city, wanted to be around like other people like me. I went to a predominantly Black and brown beauty school in the outer skirts of downtown San Diego. I really got to like discover myself and my identities around my queerness because the school was located in a town outside of the city called Hillcrest, which is predominantly like queer. So that's where my beginning started. I have worked in places from Supercuts to Aveda to now me owning my own business and taking this leap of faith. Mostly because I feel as a brown queer artist, I require more safety. And, you know, as performative as the city that I live in Portland, people don't really walk the walk when they talk the talk here. It's very performative. And so I've always wanted to have my own business, but this really kind of pushed me into this journey because I have experienced a lot of violence being behind the chair, not just with clients, but also mostly with business owners. So I love doing hair. I'm very creative. There's a lot of things that I like to do creatively that aligns people with their gender identity, whether it's aligning with your cultural heritage or background with certain like indigenous haircuts that really align with you. So my focus is more than just the shallow, not that everybody is shallow in the beauty industry, but like I think a lot of people focus just on technical skills and not really on the social skills that are really necessary in order for us to be responsibly caring for the community. And so that's kind of where my vision and goals are within the beauty industry, is to really ask these important questions that I think a lot of people avoid. And also to have these uncomfortable conversations with clients, business owners, whatever the case may be. That is kind of where I am going to go into education instead of like technical. It'll be more around political identity and politics. So that's who I am.
I love that. I love that. So I want to go back a little bit. There's so much that you gave us in that chunk. So I may jump around a little bit, but I want to start and go back because you mentioned that you were driving quite a ways, and I think in your pre-interview you said it was an hour and a half that you were driving to go to beauty school because you wanted to attend a school where the students and faculty were Black and brown people. Why was it
Yes.
important to you? Were you in San Diego at that time or in Portland?
So I am originally from San Diego, but my family moved to a city or a town outside of San Diego in Riverside County called Temecula. And Temecula, back in those days when I lived there, it was kind of like a Horace Ranch, California town,
Oh,
which comes with some interesting politics. We had, a neighbor that was was a cop and very racist towards my family. Like my family just went through a lot coming from San Diego, trying to like buy a house in a suburb area that was predominantly um, just not. I mean, I feel like there wasn't as much diversity as there is now in Temecula, but I didn't want to go to beauty school there. I heard a lot of bad things about the educators there and just like bad experiences for some of my friends who were Black, Brown, and Indigenous. And so I wanted to go somewhere that was more, you know, um, just more Black and brown. And I lucked out, two of the three educators that I had were Black, and I learned a lot from them. And I think that I wouldn't have gotten the same experience as a brown person and as a queer person if I stayed in Temecula and went to a beauty school within that town.
always want to be a hairstylist?
So I was really into makeup most of my upbringing and just self-expression in general, whether it was hair, fashion. So I looked at a few different schools for like fashion industry, and that was just like really seemed out of touch and like not like attainable for me. And then makeup, I just felt like if I'm gonna do makeup, I can also do hair, and that would just like maybe open up a lot more for me because hair is something I think people need consistently all the time. And then once I started going to beauty school, I just was like, I really found like my niche. I found like my people. I just really found myself at that time. And I was only 20 years old, but it really helped shape me as an artist to really kind of figure out that that is what I really wanted to do. And I have two tias, my aunties, that are both hairstylists, and they were telling me how great it is for me to like start off, and if I wanted to do something else, it's always a good thing to fall back on. But it was always something that I just wanted to do. I didn't really want to fall back on it. I gave everything to this career, and I'm really glad that I listened to my tias, and I'm really glad that I went for it. So,
Okay, so I want to move just slightly forward. There's a couple things and I'm not quite sure how I want to frame it. So I'll tell you what I jotted down while you were chatting, while you were talking, and then we'll go from there. So I think one of the things I'm a military family, so I moved every year and a half, like all over the world my whole life. Um,
mhm.
but I've mostly, I think, spent the majority of my adult life in the Midwest. I now live in Georgia in the South. But most of my adult life, I think I came of age in the Midwest. In the Midwest, Portland has a reputation of being very progressive. But you just described it as performative.
Mhm.
Um, can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I would love to talk about that. Portland has been known to be very progressive and like very queer friendly. And I do think that being a queer person coming here has helped me affirm my identity as a queer person and a gender variant human being. But when it comes to race, yeah, it is completely performative. And I didn't know before moving to this state that this was like the last state that allowed Black people to live and work. And they even had some it's just a very, I had no idea walking into this. And, my experience in Oregon has not just been limited to Portland. I have lived on the Oregon coast. I have lived in uh, towards Bend, in more of the centrally located in the state. And I feel like, people in Portland are like, wow, we're not like these other towns outside of Portland. We're different. And the thing is that it's very performative. So the people here will slap on Black Lives Matter, trans people, this and that on their windows. But the minute a Black or brown or indigenous person or a queer person is like, or a disabled person is like, this, is an issue X, Y, and Z, then this whole thing of like getting angry and like saying that you're an aggressive person, that I'm an aggressive brown, queer, angry person, that whole thing comes out. Or it's like, I'm going to start crying and make it about me. I didn't know. I wasn't meaning it that way. Instead of being that, like, the people here, I feel like cannot be just accountable and be like, okay. And not that, like, everyone does that every time, but like, I feel like in San Diego, someone might flip me off and be like, you fucking whatever, this or that, call me whatever racial slur they want to. And it's more in my face. Whereas in Portland, it's like, it's covert, it's like, I'm going to, I'm going to use you as a little prop as a brown queer person to hire you in my commission salon. But the minute you tell me that my behavior is problematic or harmful, I'm going to deflect and tell you that you are the person you're the problem. And I've just never experienced this type of covert racism in my life. Like, I've experienced a lot of racism in my life as a Mexican Armenian person. I think that in Portland, it's just more, it's like, it's very it's very scary how it just kind of, it's like very like one minute there's a person trying to be nice to you, and then the minute they're not. Or there's like language that's very strange. Like salons I've worked at will be like, this person has Hispanic hair, and I'm just like, you can't like label someone's Hispanic hair, because I don't know if you know, like the Latinx diaspora, like we have all different types of hair. Like that's a very weird thing to say. So like just things like that are very like, ooh, you shouldn't say that, and then like, get offended. And instead of just being like, okay, I need to sit with that, and maybe people are just not really good at hard conversations here. They want to put up a front of who they are and not really do the work behind it. Say that I'm anti-racism, but really are you? Because your actions don't show the same thing as that what you're trying to portray to people in general. So that's been my
Yeah,
experience here so far.
I gotcha. And what it sounds like to me is that Portland is very much like the rest of the United States in that way. And even it's funny that you like what you were describing. I was actually just talking about recently about even how the beauty industry kind of reacted in 2020 when everyone was forced to sit down, and now we've watched the policeman kneel on George Floyd's neck for almost 10 minutes while his partners stood by and watched, and we watched Breonna Taylor, and all these things. And so all these brands are coming out with these Black Lives Matter, da 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 da. That was in 2020, and they were all hype about education and representation and inclusion. And now it's 2024, and a lot of those brands just kind of went back to what they were doing pre 2020. There's some that have stuck around, but so it sounds like Portland is just like the rest of the United States, but they just are trying to look progressive while doing it. Got it.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
So, in that same vein, I wanted to point out because even though this won't post until June, we're recording this in May. And so I wanted to point
Yeah.
out that May 17th was actually International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Interphobia, and Transphobia. You've already told us that you identify as queer. Inclusivity is a big topic of conversation in the beauty industry, as I just mentioned. Um, will you share with us a bit about your journey as a queer person in the beauty industry? What's been and you shared some of that, but I guess um, maybe you'll want to like delve maybe more specifically into something. But what's been your experience specifically with salon owners, staff? How are you received by salon clients? Are there
Hmm.
any like procedures put in place for when a client says something offensive or a staff member said, talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like automatically when I walk into a situation of like being employed at a salon, that especially here in Oregon, I tend to be the one that's like, okay, you're that person that's like queer and brown, so like we're gonna ask you to do this inclusion work when it's like, I mean, I know that's a really important thing to do, but I feel like it falls on the backs of, people with these multiple identities. And so at first I was like, yeah, I really want to speak on this. And, like back in when I was in San Diego, I was very like femme presenting, had very long hair. I just, you could probably say that I was looking, like a cis woman at that time in my life. But I was still like out as a bisexual person and had, relationships with people of all genders. And within that experience, I did feel like, as people would be very like wanting to ask me really inappropriate questions, like coworkers, or people would be like, oh, oops, I shouldn't say these things. But the more that I became more visibly aware of, not visibly aware, but the more I became aware of my gender identity as a trans person, as a two spirit person, as a trans masked person, I feel like once I started to present more that way, they always say representation is important, but it also has a cost because our safety becomes more, more questioned when we are open about who we are and we're visible as a trans person. And so like the the first salon that I worked at back here in Portland, originally I was kind of playing with my gender identity, but I expressed that my pronouns are they, them, that this is, who I am. And I completely got misgendered. It was kind of like, ooh, I'm really like, let me sit down and talk to you about your gender. And that's already really uncomfortable. Like, it doesn't need to be like that. It could just be like, hey, okay, your pronouns are they, them, cool. It doesn't have to be this awkward situation where someone's like, oh, I'm really working on it, and it's just, you're just really feminine, and you wear makeup and stuff, and I'm just like, yeah, but guys, trans men, trans people who are not even like, I feel like there's so much assumption about gender. It's like you're either a man or a woman, and that just doesn't, like, culturally for me, I'm indigenous person, like we don't do that. Like Armenian language, we have one pronoun for everybody. And then also like being Native American, indigenous, and being Mexican, like even in my cultures studying that, there's been multiple genders. And so like it's just weird to go into a salon and then be like, these are my pronouns in this progressive queer ass fucking city. And then people are like, oh, I can't say they them for you because you're just so feminine. And it's like, I'm not here to negotiate my identity with you. I'm here to tell you these are my pronouns. I don't care what you think I should be or what I shouldn't be. And this is like things that we have to deal with as trans people in our own families, in our own circles of friends. And then we have to deal with this shit at work. So I was like, I can't work here anymore. First of all, that was going on. And then also, I had Oregon has a lot of people who are very racist. I'm going to just say it. I've had to kick people out of my chair and be the only one who does this in that salon. And then every time I go into a salon, it's like, that's a person who's like provocative by like, they're gonna be the one to speak up about these things. So people would always come to me, this person said that. And I'm like, I can't be fighting everyone's battles just because I have these identities and I'm visibly like, hi, I'm this person. And so then the second salon I worked at, the one that like most recently, the staff that I worked with was really good about it, but I felt like the business owner was still just trying to figure it out, and I'm working on it, I'm just trying to figure it out. And it's like, okay, but like, you have all these signs on your door about trans this, and you have to like educate yourself. If you're going to act like you're inclusive, you have to actually do the work to be that way. And so educating yourself beyond just trans people and black and brown and indigenous people doing all this fucking labor, for free to people. I'm like, if people are already going to come to me for these questions, then I'm going to make, an educational experience with this and get paid for it. So I
Absolutely.
think that like, even in these progressive areas, they're not always like great at, really working on it and actually acting on it. Where now the salon that I'm going into, there's multiple like queer people there, and I feel like I won't have the same issues there. So this feels very good to me going into a safer space.
As someone who is a brand owner, and I guess I want to speak specifically to salon owners now. We're having as an industry, we're having these conversations about inclusivity, whether it's around race or sexuality. Um, when you, as specifically around queer identities, people who are not straight people, quote unquote, right? Or so if you're coming in, and I know for me, I graduated cosmetology school when I was 21 years old. From a I graduated from a really high school, really small town. My first um interactions, like direct interactions with gay people or anyone of any other sexuality, as far as I knew, was in cosmetology school. In hindsight, I realized that's not true. But as far as I knew at the time, it's cosmetology school. So I've had almost 30 years now to work to be better and to have understanding. Um, there are some people who are just now coming around to this and are like, okay, maybe I need to like respect people in who they tell me that they are. If you're working in an environment and you tell someone my pronouns are they them, and they're having a conversation with you and they misgender you and they realize it immediately, what is the appropriate way to recover from that so that it doesn't make it weird or awkward for you?
Yeah, I
Does that
think
make
it just goes the same for anybody, regardless if they're cisgender or trans or whatever.
sense?
Like, if I'm talking to like somebody who's cisgender and I accidentally misgendered and used the wrong pronoun, if I go, oh my God, I'm so sorry, and like make it a
Mhm,
big deal, then I feel like
mhm.
that person that's receiving that is like, ooh, this makes me feel really uncomfortable. That's how I
Cringy.
feel when
Yeah,
people do that.
yeah, yeah,
So because I do it too, because I'll like literally say they, them for everybody until I know them. And then someone will be like, no, that person's she, her. And I'm like, oh, okay, she, her. And then I just correct myself and keep it moving. Because the
yeah,
minute I'm like, oh shit, oh my God, then it's like,
yeah, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
you're making me uncomfortable. Like, you're
Yeah.
making me really uncomfortable.
Yeah, so really just correct yourself and move on. And
Yes.
I've kind of adopted that same thing, is like I just refer to people as they them or as people or as humans or whatever. I try not to assign
Yeah.
gender because I understand now that pretty much everything I've been taught about gender is a lie. And so now just trying to understand what's really going on. And I never want to make
Yeah.
anyone feel uncomfortable, you know. So, what do you say to the people who are like, oh my gosh, you're just being too sensitive. It's not even a big deal.
Yeah, so I get that a lot actually, it's like, oh, but it shouldn't matter, and oh, people are just learning. Like, I just had a recent experience before I decided to have my own business. I was having an interview with a salon owner here in Portland, and this salon owner, she looked over my whole Instagram, and of course, I am not one to censor my experiences. I think that like living out loud is important for others like me, or someone maybe younger who's in the industry to see that.
Mhm.
But this person like immediately was like, um, how are you going to react if someone is an older person and doesn't understand your pronouns, and how are you going to take it? And so it's like almost like the person didn't ask about my skill, just went right into my identities and was like making me feel like I'm an issue. So what I would say to people is that if you are willing to learn, it just takes practice. Like, I've had multiple partners where they have like changed their pronouns middle of the relationship or wherever of the relationship, and it's like, yeah, you have to practice and say these things, but it just takes practice and like doing the actual work. um, it is a big deal. I think that like if somebody who is cisgendered, that's a woman, and I'm like, hey sir, hey man, what's up guy, what up boy, like if I constantly say these male masculine words that they could be perceived that way, that person's going to be uncomfortable. So it affects everybody. Identity affects everyone, regardless of people wanting to call like trans people snowflakes or whatever kind of dog whistle they want to use for people. It is important because trans people have a high suicide rate. People are unliving themselves because literally people are like, no, you're not that. You're this. Your name is that. Dead naming somebody, misgendering people, those are all acts of violence, regardless if somebody wants to see that as being violent. It doesn't change the fact that it is.
And it's just not that hard to be respectful. I don't understand. Like, it's just not that
I
hard
feel
to be
like it's out
respectful.
of spite. I feel like it's out of spite. I feel like people are just like, no, I'm not going to do it. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
then I'm not going to be around you. It's that
Yeah.
simple.
It's not easy. No, for real.
Yeah.
And I meant to ask this earlier, but I forgot. What can you explain what two spirit means? I actually, yeah, will you just explain for anyone who may not have heard that term before? What does two spirit mean?
From my understanding, as an Indigenous person, it is a word that could be used for being queer. It could be used as trans. You could be like a gay person who doesn't identify with being non-binary or trans, and you could still use it. But it is kind of like a word universally used by Indigenous folks from Turtle Island to describe that they're queer, basically. I think it's kind of like an umbrella term for being queer with many different identities belonging into that.
Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Um, okay. So I know that what made me reach out to you, um, I believe it was like a post that you did where you had been hurt pretty badly. Um, and you were just recovering. I have no idea how, because I'm not sure. I think I was following you. I don't know how, I can't remember how I found you. I just obviously saw your page and thought you were interesting and decided to follow you. But what really called my attention to your page was that you were hurt pretty badly. Um, Understanding that your health is your business, but I know that some pretty horrific things happen to you as a result of being hurt. Whatever you're willing to share or would like to share around that, please
Sure.
do.
Sure. I'm a neurodivergent person, so like I guess you could say like ADHD, autistic, whatever, like, like there's many things that neurodivergent means. It just means that you're not neurotypical. It could mean that you have um, you know, let's see, it could mean that you have any type of mental situation that is, a neurodivergence. And at my work, I have been always really open about that. And I was struggling with my health. I was fired from my job because I was sick and I couldn't come in for one haircut, and the employer was like still trying to get me to go in, and that's very triggering for me when white people, when I say my boundaries and then they want me to do work still, like it just feels very yucky to me. And so I asked the owner if I could have a meeting with her to talk to her about how that made me feel, and like just to really go over things, because I felt like I was not being treated the same as other people who've been calling out. Um, and I was sick that week, but I had a couple days prior to that, I called out because literally Armenia, where my father's ancestry stems from, was going through genocide, and I was not able to focus at work. And so the owner was like, I understand. I wish there was peace in the Middle East, that kind of like corny ass shit, but was like, you can go home. So I went home. I had food poisoning a couple days later, and that's when I couldn't do the client. And it was like one haircut who's my regular. And so then it was like, well, do you think you could just rally it up and make it over here? And I'm just like, no, I told you I was sick. So I wanted to talk with her. When I went to go talk with her, she had her husband there, who I've met maybe twice, 3 times. And they both proceeded to gang up on me and brought up my race, brought up disability, and said that I wasn't disabled, said that what they were doing was not racist. And I said, you are white. You cannot tell me what feels racist to me when you're bringing up my race in a conversation about my health. And then after all of this, I was, you know, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to have this conversation. I put my hands up, I walked out of the room, and it was like the owner was yelling at me, triangulating her husband to extract power um, against me, and then was like, you're done here, get out. And I felt like I was felt scared for my safety, so I left. This woman continued to touch my belongings and box them up for me to come get them. I was scared. I couldn't even go over there for like a week to pick up my shit from there because I was so worked up that like, I was using my voice to speak about like disability justice, about like having an illness, having an autoimmune disease that affects me, that like if I'm sick, I can't like just snap out of it and come to work to do a haircut. And I just feel like that's common with like a lot of commission salons, that it's like there's not a lot of care around like people's health. Like this salon doesn't give me health insurance. This salon doesn't provide anything for my health. And then to have the audacity to get mad at me for calling in is just really strange. And then to fire me violently. And then, you know, I it was like a month later that I had my injury, and I was going to start at the salon that I am going to start at in June. And then I broke my leg, and like I shattered my ankle. I broke multiple bones in my leg. I'm still recovering. So as a disabled artist, then that I lost some of my clients because I wasn't able to get behind the chair quick enough, and that salon took a lot of my clients and still works on a lot of them. And, you know, a lot of people told me that who did go back there to get a haircut and then would be like, yeah, they just said that you left because you weren't vibing with the salon. And it was like, no, I literally was violently fired because of being disabled. And the race shit came out like in the midst of like Palestine, in Armenia, like it's all Congo, like Sudan, all of it is connected. And like me being a Middle Eastern person, I'm not going to not say stuff. And I feel like it was just an excuse to get rid of me because I've been so loud about politics on my page. And I know that now as a business person that will attract the right people, but in the midst of all of that, it was just really traumatic. And now I already had been living with disabilities, but now I have like a mobility challenge on top of it. And, I'm 40, I'll be 41 in July. And so like, I still want a good chunk of time in this industry around education and, providing services for folks, but I also want to reframe things to show people that like there are disabled artists in our industry and there are disabled clients. So like that is needs to be a key part of our inclusion discussions that we're having. It can't just be, oh, queer this and we have rainbow flags. It's like, yeah, but there's also disabled people that are queer. There's disabled Black people, brown people, indigenous people, and there's like so many identities that need to be focused on if people are going to be like tooting their horn about inclusion, you know?
Absolutely. I do. I do. And I mean, ultimately, I feel like it boils down to like just knowing and understanding that other people outside of yourself exist and then respecting them as individuals. But like I said, I get that that seems to be difficult. So
Yeah,
I'm
it does.
grateful. I'm grateful for you being willing to tackle the um, I have a conversation on this podcast quite often. I'll ask people if whether or not they talk about politics behind the chair, and I always say quote unquote politics because what one person considers politics can literally be life or death for someone else. Like it's just political theater, when it doesn't affect you. um, so I'm grateful. I think this industry needs that. It's something that doesn't exist a lot of. I mean, there's pockets of it here and there, but generally it's not something
Yeah.
that exists. And I think it's necessary. So I'm excited to see what you do with it. And yeah, I was just trying to find because you had written something about, I'll get my old lady glasses on. Um, you had written something that I specifically, but oh well, I think you actually have already touched on that. It was just around identity politics and how harmful and irresponsible it is to ignore how people identify.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people, like you said, will say, well, the salon isn't a place for that. People just want to get their hair done. And I'm like, yeah, that might be true, but people also will say some shit behind your chair, and you're like, not in my
Yeah,
chair. And
yeah,
I'm sorry, like, it might be, I'm not political, might work for you, but I'm a brown, queer person, like, with disabilities. Like, I can't escape that. That's my reality every single day.
yeah,
Um, so, like, even at the last interview that I had with a salon owner, what I was telling you about earlier, that person was like just asking me really inappropriate questions around identity, but was like acting as if it's my issue. And that's the problem is like, you know, are we just catering to a certain type of person or are we trying to really include everyone? Because like sitting down and telling me, I saw your posts. They're very political, and I just don't think as a business person that's good. Like, it's not good for business. And it's like, maybe not for your business, but like people who are disabled, people who are Black or brown or um, queer, they're going to seek out a person's
yes,
chair that actually makes them feel safe. So if
yeah,
I would always have people be like, oh, that person said something really bad about this type of group of person or this group of person. And I'm like, did you say anything? No.
yeah,
And I'm like, that needs to change. That's where
yeah,
I come in. And that's what work I want to do is like sit down with stylists and
hmm
be like, you need to have these hard conversations. Because if you
hmm
don't, you can't sit there and say that you're not racist and toot your own horn when really you're not even doing any of the work around race or texturism or colorism behind your chair. And I've seen it happen so much. And sometimes it's not even like covert, it's like straight up overt, something very harmful to say. And I've been at every salon that I've been recently in the last 10 years, I've been like the only one that has spoken up in those areas. Going into the salon that I'm going in now, it's like the first time I met with the salon owner and the other stylists that are independent there, they're like, when we hear something, we say something. So I just hope that that's okay with you. And I'm like, yeah, I want people like that, that actually gonna say something, like, and it doesn't have to be like, bitch, what the fuck did you say? It could be like, hey, what you just said was really harmful. That is not an accurate depiction of reality. And I do not accept that kind of talk in my chair, just so you know going forward. That's it.
That's it. It's real
That's it.
simple. People act like we want them to like paint their house black with a Palestinian flag on it and like
Literally.
don't let people
Literally.
say racist, sexist, homophobic, ableist things. That's it. Just don't let it slide.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's
And then
not
when
that hard.
people correct you, don't take it personal. I mean, you
Yeah.
might. I mean, who doesn't at times like that? But like, really try to sit. If I could give any advice to anyone who's like, I'm learning and I want to know more about identity politics, I would say like, sit with those hard conversations that make you uncomfortable. I have them all the time. There's stuff that I still have to check myself with, like where I'm learning things too. Like, none of us um are free from fucking white supremacy in the existence of the world. Like, I'm sorry, but that's just a reality. It's a constant thing you have to work on. You can't sit there and say, in this house or in this business, we do, like, okay, but are you actually doing that when your staff is black, brown, and indigenous and says something? Are you deflecting and saying you're the problem for being too aggressive? Or are you sitting with that discomfort and being like, hey, maybe I did cause some harm there?
I think it's been 20 years. What do you think is the most important part of your story to this point?
I think that in the first 10 years or so, I didn't always speak up. I didn't always know what to say, or also like let white owners of the salon treat me a certain way because I was like, had that mentality of like, I'm at work, I have to do this and I have to perform, and that like capitalistic brain and like inner colonizer is what I call it. It's like, you better get to work and you gotta like be productive, and who cares, like about your feelings. And it's like, the minute that I change those dynamics in my personal life, like no longer accepting relationships in my personal life to say those things, or like the minute that I actually started to use the masa, is what we call in my culture, like your heart, like the minute I started to really rely on my masa and my heart and being like, I'm going to speak up about this, but also just unwinding my own gender identity and becoming more visibly like queer person. I think people, clock me as a queer trans person. People clock me as like being a Middle Eastern person. And so like those things I can't hide from. And so like the more that I've been more open and like, yes, this is who I am, the more challenging it has gotten. But it's also been more rewarding to me and my energy and my spirituality, my connections with other people, because they're more genuine. I'm not performing for someone to just give me money, even though they say racist shit in my chair, or sexist shit in my chair, or homophobic shit in my chair. Now it's like, okay, I really do believe like once you tap into your essence and your true identity as much as you can and really affirm that, I think that confidence is not just a shallow confidence of, oh, I look good. It's like, which is great. I want everyone to feel that way. But it's more of like, I know who I am and no one else is going to take that away from me. So the time that I spent really working on myself really changed my experience in the beauty industry. And some people don't have that ability or privilege to be able to do that, and I understand that. But I want to speak up more and more and teach others to speak up more, so they feel like they can have safety in their chair, because all of those acts are violence, and without the tools of how to like have those conversations, I think people just act like it didn't happen, and that's irresponsible.
Word. Word. Okay. Before we move on to the next segment, I have a segment called Story Time with Auntie Hair Coach. Is there any part of your story that you wish that I had asked you about? I don't want to leave anything on the table.
Um, no, not really.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a segment on the podcast. I call it Story Time with Auntie Hair Coach. So I have 3 prompts for you. I give you the prompt, and then you just tell me a quick, short something about the prompt. I have three. You can do all three, but at least choose one. All
Okay.
right. Okay, so the first prompt is, if you didn't do hair, what would you be doing instead? The second prompt is a scenario where you were wrong and had to course correct. And the third prompt is the worst beauty industry advice you've ever received.
Okay. So I'm gonna go with the last one
Okay.
because I just it really hit me. But I remember when I first started doing hair and I was told fake it till you make it.
Mm.
And I think that sometimes that can be helpful. But when you're saying that to black and brown people, I feel it's very dismissive of our experiences. I think that that's kind of like the same thing as like leave your personal shit at home and be on stage to work kind of thing. And it's dehumanizing because like we're not robots, we're not copy machines, we're artists. And so telling people to fake it till they make it, I used to say that shit all the time, but like it got me nowhere. Faking it did not make it for me. I think that we need to really watch what we say to younger stylists. I think that teaching people to have boundaries professionally is really important. And I think that when you're like fake it till you make it, it's like don't have any emotions, don't have any feelings, just like get it done and like be productive, be like, somebody who's gonna make us a lot of money. And it's just like if there's no heart centered in such a creative field, I feel like we lose an opportunity for people to really really excel at what they want to do, because I do think with this fake it till you make it, there's also the like do every service, like you have to do every kind of service and be able to take anything on your books. And I just think that that's not really fair to people because some people just are great at like certain things. And I think that if I learned early on to have boundaries, to not fake it till I make it, to be authentic and really understand my own true identity as an artist, I think that I would have maybe had more strength to speak up earlier on in my career.
So powerful. That's so powerful. But I'm excited for you that you are growing into exactly who you always were and learning to speak up for yourself. That's actually, I've been behind the chair for 28 years and honestly, probably have just learned that skill very quickly in the last 4 years. I think 2020 was like that was the hard line in the sand for me. So
Yeah.
I've gotten very good at speaking up. So I'm grateful from good for you for getting that lesson sooner than I did. And I'm excited about your intent to help younger stylists to get that lesson even sooner than we did. Because why should we be coddling bullshit? Like nobody's coddling.
Oh,
No one did that for
you
me,
talk
right?
about it.
Seriously. I'm just so glad to have had a few moments to chat with you. I appreciate you taking time out of your day. Um, I'm looking forward to watching your career grow. You're already familiar with Kia Neal, yeah?
Yes, absolutely.
One that you want to be connected with. And there's somebody else
Yes.
whose name is failing me right now, but I think when they come across when I remember who it is, I'll DM it to you. Because yeah, I feel like that'll be really helpful on your journey as an educator. And yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate you, Tash.
Thank you so much, Tasha. It's been such a pleasure being on here with you and to just talk like very openly and, without censoring myself. It really is cathartic and also just very like connective. So thank you so much for your time as well.
Sit down, sit down. Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you could make it.
Next time on Therapy Sessions with Auntie Hair Coach.
I don't know if I failed to ask her if she was taking medications or she failed to tell us. I can't remember. All I know is I went to tone it and her hair started turning polka dots, like dark spots in her hair. And I was like, I pulled it through and I was like, whoa.